Part 7th, in which it is told how Queen Eleanor sent for Robin Hood to come to the court of famous London town, and how Robin Hood came at her bidding. Likewise it is told how King Henry chased Robin through the land, yet caught him not. Section 1. Robin and the 3 of his merry men shoot before Queen Eleanor in Finsbury Fields. The high road stretched white and dusty in the hot summer afternoon sun, and the trees stood motionless along the roadside. All across the meadowlands and hot air danced and quivered, and in the limpid waters of the lowland brook, spanned by a little stone bridge, the fish hung motionless above the yellow gravel, and the dragonfly sat quite still, perched upon the sharp tip of a spike of the rushes, with its wings glistening in the sun. Along the road a youth came riding upon a fair milk-white barb, and the folk that he passed stopped and turned and looked after him, for never had so lovely a lad, or one so gaily clad, been seen in Nottingham before. He could not have been more than 16 years of age, and was as fair as any maiden. His long yellow hair flowed behind him as he rode along, all clad in silk and velvet, with jewels fashioned and dagger jangling against the pommel of the saddle. Thus came the Queen's page, young Richard Partington, from famous London town, down in Nottinghamshire, upon Her Majesty's bidding, to seek Robin Hood in Sherwood Forest. The road was hot and dusty, and his journey had been long, for that day he had come all the way from Leicester town, a good 20 miles and more. Wherefore young Partington was right glad when he saw before him a sweet little inn, all shady and cool beneath the trees, in front of the door of which a sign hung pendant, bearing the picture of a blue boar. Here he drew rein, and called loudly for a pottle of Aramish wine to be brought him, for stout country ale was too coarse a drink for this young gentleman. 5 lusty fellows sat upon the bench beneath the pleasant shade of the wide spreading oak in front of the inn door, drinking ale and beer, and all stared amain at this fair and gallant lad. 2 of the stoutest of the men were clothed in Lincoln green, and a great heavy wooden staff leaned against the gnarled oak tree trunk beside each fellow. The landlord came and brought a pottle of wine and a long narrow glass upon a slaver, which he held up to the page as he sat upon his horse. Young Partington poured forth the bright yellow wine, and, holding the glass aloft, cried, "Here is to the health and long happiness of my royal mistress, the noble Queen Eleanor, and may my journey and her desires soon have end, and I find a certain stout yeoman men call Robin Hood." At these words all stared, but presently the 2 stout yeomen in Lincoln green began whispering together. Then one of the 2, whom Partington thought to be the tallest and stoutest fellow he had ever beheld, spoke up and said, "What seekest thou of Robin Hood, Sir Page, and what does our good Queen Eleanor wish of him? I ask this of thee not foolishly, but with reason, for I know somewhat of this stout yeoman." "And thou knowest aught of him, good fellow?" said young Partington. "Thou wilt do great service to him and great pleasure to our royal queen by aiding me to find him." Then up spake the other yeoman, who was a handsome fellow with a sunburned face and nut-brown curling hair. "Thou hast an honest look, Sir Page, and our queen is kind and true to all stout yeomen. Methinks I and my friend here might safely guide thee to Robin Hood, for we know where he may be found. Yet, I tell thee plainly, we would not for all merry England have aught of harm befall him." "Set thy mind at ease, I bring naught of ill with me," quoth Richard of Partington. "I bring a kind message to him from our queen. Therefore, an ye know where he is to be found, I pray you to guide me hither." Then the 2 yeomen looked at one another again, and the tall man said, "Surely it were safe to do this thing, Will," whereat the other nodded. Thereupon both arose, and the tall yeoman said, "We think thou art true, Sir Page, and meant no harm. Therefore we will guide thee to Robin Hood, as thou dost wish." Then Partington paid his score, and the yeoman coming forward, they all straightway departed their way. Under the greenwood tree, in the cool shade that spread all around upon the sward, with flickering lights here and there, Robin Hood and many of his band lay upon the soft green grass, while Allan a Dale sang and played upon his sweetly sounding harp. All listened in silence, for young Allan's singing was one of the greatest joys in all the world to them. But as they listened, there came of a sudden the sound of a horse's feet, and presently Little John and Will Stuteley came forth from the forest path into the open glade, young Richard Partington riding between them upon his Wilkmite horse. The three came toward where Robin Hood sat, all the band staring with might and main, for never had they seen so gay a sight as their young page, nor one so richly clad in silks and velvets and gold and jewels. Then Robin arose, stepping forth to meet him, and Partington, leaping from his horse and doffing his cap of crimson velvet, met Robin as he came. "Now welcome," cried Robin, "now welcome, fair youth, and tell me, I pray thee, what bringeth one of so fair a presence and clad in such noble garb to our poor forest of Sherwood?" Then young Partington said, "If I err not, thou art the famous Robin Hood, and these thy stout band of outlawed yeomen? To thee I bring greetings from our noble Queen Eleanor. Oft hath she have heard thy spoken of and thy merry doings hereabout, and fain would she behold thy face. Therefore she bids me tell thee that if thou wilt presently come to London town, she will do all in her power to guard thee against harm, and will send thee back safe to Sherwood Forest again. 4 days hence in Finsbury Fields our good King Henry of great renown holdeth the grand shooting match, and all the most famous archers of merry England will be thereat. Our Queen would fain see thee strive with them, knowing that if thou wilt come, thou wilt with little doubt carry off the prize. Therefore she hath sent me with this greeting, and furthermore sends thee, as a sign of great goodwill, this golden ring from off her own very thumb, which I give thee herewith into thy hands." Then Robin Hood bowed his head, and taking the ring kissed it rightly, loyally. Then slipping it upon his little finger, quoth he, "Sooner would I lose my life than this ring, and ere it departs from me, my hand shall be cold as death, or stricken off at the wrist. Fair Sir Page, I will do as our Queen's bidding, and will presently hie with thee to London. But ere we go, I will feast thee here in Woodlands with this very best we have." "It may not be," said the page, "we have no time to tarry, therefore get thyself ready straightway, and if there be any of thy band that thou wouldst take with thee, our Queen bids me say that she will make them right welcome likewise." "Truly thou art right," said Robin, "and we have but short time to stay, therefore I will get me ready presently. I will choose 3 of my men only to go with me, and these 3 shall be Little John, my own true right-hand man, Will Scarlet my cousin, and Allen a Dale my minstrel. Go, lads, and get ye ready straightway, and we will presently off with all speed that we may. Thou, Will Stuteley, shall be the chief of the band while I am gone." Then Little John and Will Scarlet and Allen a Dale ran leaping full of joy to make themselves ready, while Robin also prepared himself for the journey. After a while, they all 4 came forth, and a right fair sight they made, for Robin was clad in blue from head to foot, and Little John and Will Scarlet in good Lincoln green, and as for Allen a Dale, he was dressed in scarlet from the crown of his head to the toes of his pointed shoes. Each man wore beneath his cap a little head covering of burnished steel set with rivets of gold, and underneath his jerkin a coat of linked mail, as fine as carved wool, yet so tough that no arrow could pierce it. Then, seeing all were ready, young Partington mounted his horse again, and the yeomen having shaken hands all around, the 5 departed upon their way. That night they took up their inn in Melton Mowbray, in Leicestershire, and the next night they lodged at Kettering, in Nottinghamshire, and at the next at Bedford town, and the next at St. Albans, in Hertfordshire. This place they felt no long after the middle of the night, and travelled fast through the tender dawning of the summer day, when the dews lay shining on the meadows, and faint mist hung in the dales, when the birds sang their sweetest, and cobwebs beneath the hedges glimmered like fairy cloth of silver. They came at last to the towers and walls of famous London town, while the morn was still young, and all golden towards the east. Queen Eleanor sat in a royal bower, through the open casements of which poured the sweet yellow sunshine in great floods of golden light. All about her stood ladies in waiting, chatting in low voices, while she herself sat dreamily, where the mild air came softly drifting into the room, laden with the fresh perfumes of sweet red roses that bloomed in the great garden beneath the wall. To her came one who said that her page, Richard Partington, and 4 stout yeomen waited her pleasure in the court below. When Queen Eleanor arose joyously and bade them be straightway shown to her presence. Thus Robin Hood and Little John and Will Scarlet and Allen a Dale came before the queen into her own royal bower. Then Robin kneeled before the queen with his hands folded upon his breast, saying in simple phrase, "Here am I, Robin Hood. Thou didst bid me come, and lo, I do thy bidding. I give myself to thee as thy true servant, and will do thy commanding, even if it be to the shedding of the last drop of my life's blood." But good Queen Eleanor smiled pleasantly upon him, bidding him to arise. Then she made them all seated to rest themselves after their long journey. Rich food was brought them, and noble wines, and she had her own page to wait upon the wants of the yeomen. At last they had eaten all they could. She began questioning them of their merry adventures. Then they told her all of the lusty doings therein spoken of, and among others that concerning the Bishop of Hereford and Sir Richard of Lee, and how the bishop had aided 3 days in Sherwood Forest. At this the queen and the ladies about her laughed again and again, for they pictured to themselves the stout bishop abiding in the forest and ragging the woods in lusty sport with Robin and his band. Then, when they had told all that they could bring to mind, the queen asked Allen to sing to her, for his fame as a minstrel had reached even to the court of London town. So straightway Allen took up his harp in his hand, and without saying or asking more, touched the strings lightly till they all rang sweetly. Then he sang thus: gentle river, bring thy crystal waters flow, sliding where the aspens shiver, gliding where the lilies blow, singing over pebbled showers, kissing blossoms bending low, beneath the dipping shallows, purpling where the breezes blow. Floating on thy breast forever, down thy current I could glide. Grief and pain should reach me never on thy bright and gentle tide. So my aching heart seeks thine, love, where to find its rest and peace. For though loving bliss is mine, love, and my many troubles cease. Thus Allen sang, and as he sang, all eyes dwelled upon him, and not a sound broke the stillness. And even after he had done, the silence hung for a short space. So the time passed, till the hour drew nigh for the holding of the great archery match in Finsbury Fields. A gay sight were famous Finsbury Fields on that bright and sunny morning of lusting summer time. Along the end of the meadow stood the booths for the different bands of archers, for the king's yeomen were divided into companies of 80 men, and each company had a captain over it. So on the bright greensward stood 10 booths of stripped canvas, a booth for each band of royal archers, and at the peak of each fluttered a flag in mellow air, and the flag was the color that belonged to the captain of each band. For the center booth hung the yellow flag of Tempus, the famous bow-bearer of the king. Next to it on one hand was the blue flag of Gilbert of the White Hand, and on the other the blood-red pennant of stout young Clifton of Buckinghamshire. 7 other archer captains were also men of great renown. Among them were Elbert of Kent, William of Southampton, but those first names were most famous of all. The noise of many voices, in talk and laughter, came from within the booths, and in and out ran the attendants like ants about an anthill. Some bore ale and beer, and some bundles of bowstrings or sleeves of arrows. On each side of the archery range were rows upon rows of seats. Reaching high aloft in the center of the north side was a raised dais for the king and queen, shaded by canvas of gay colors and hung about with streaming silken pendants of red and blue and green and white. As yet the king and queen had not yet come, but all the other benches were full of people, rising head above head, high aloft till it made the eye dizzy to look upon. 80 yards distant from the mark from which the archers were to shoot stood 10 fair targets, each target marked by a flag of the color belonging to the band that was to shoot to thereat. So all was ready for the coming of the queen and king. At last a great blast of bugles sounded, and in the meadows came riding 6 trumpeters with 6 silver trumpets, from which hung velvet banners, heavy with rich workings of silver and gold thread. Behind these came stout King Henry upon a dappling grey stallion, with his queen beside him upon a milk-white palfrey. On each side of them walked the yeomen of the guard, the bright sunlight flashing from the polished blades of the steel heralds they carried. Behind these came the court and great crowd, so that presently all the lawn was alive with bright colors, with silk and velvet, with waving plumes and streaming gold, with flashing jewels and sword hilts, a gallant sight on that bright summer day. Then all the people arose and shouted, so that their voices sounded like the storm upon the Cornish coast, when the dark waves run upon the shore and leap and break, surging amid the rocks. So, amid the roaring and the surging people, and the waving of scarfs and handkerchiefs, the king and queen came to their place, and, getting down from their horses, mounted the broad stairs that led to the raised platform, and there took their seats on 2 thrones bedecked with purple silks and cloths of silver and gold. When all was quiet, a bugle sounded, and straightway the archers came marching in order from their tents. 40 they were in all, as stalwart a band of yeomen as they could be found in all the wide world. So they came in orderly fashion, and stood in front of the daises where King Henry and his queen sat. King Henry looked up and down the ranks right proudly, for his heart warmed within him at the sight of such a gallant band of yeomen. Then he bade his herald, Sir Hugh de Monbray, stand forth and proclaim the rules governing the game. So Sir Hugh stepped to the edge of the platform and spoke in a clear, loud voice, and thus he said, that each man should shoot 7 arrows at the target that belonged to his band, and, of the 80 yeomen of each band, the 3 that shot the best should be chosen. These 3 shall shoot 3 arrows apiece, and the one that shot the best should again be chosen. Then each of these should again shoot 3 arrows apiece, and the one that shot the best should have the first prize. The one that shot the next best would have the second, and the one that shot the next best should have the third prize. Each of the others should have 80 silver pennies for shooting. The first prize was to be 20 golden pounds, a silver bugle horn inlaid with gold, and a quiver with 10 arrows tipped with gold and feathered with white swans' wings therein. The second prize was to be 50 of the fattest bucks that ran on Dallin Lee, to be shot when the yeoman had won them chosen. The third prize was to be 2 tuts of good Rhenish wine. So Sir Hugh spoke, and when he had done all, the archers waved their bows aloft and shouted. Each band turned and marched in order back to its place. And now the shooting began, the captains first taking stand and speeding their shafts, and then making room for the men who shot, each in turn after them. 280 shafts were shot in all, and so deftly were they sped, that when the shooting was done, each target looked like the back of a hedgehog when the farm dogs snuffed at it. A long time was taken in the shooting, and when it was over, the judges came forward, looking carefully at the targets, and proclaimed in a loud voice which 3 had shot the best from the separate bands. Then a great hubbub of voices rose, each man among the crowd that looked on calling for his favorite archer. Then 10 fresh targets were brought forward, and every sound was hushed as the archers took their places once more. This time the shooting more speedily done, for only 9 shafts were shot by each band. Not an arrow missed the target, but in that of Gilbert of the White Hand, 5 arrows were in the small white spot that marked the center. Of the 5, 3 were sped by Gilbert. Then the judges came forward again and looked at the targets, called aloud the names of the archers chosen as the best bowmen of each band. Of these, Gilbert of the White Hand led, for 6 of the 10 arrows he had shot had lodged in the center. But stout Tempest and young Clifton trod close upon his heels, yet the others stood a fair chance for the second or third place. And now, amid the roaring of the crowd, these 10 stout fellows that were left went back to their tents to rest for a while and change their bowstrings. For naught must fail at this next round, and no hand must tremble or eye grow dim because of weariness. When whist the deep buzz and hum of talking sounded all around, like the noise of the wind in the leafy forest, Queen Eleanor turned to the king, and quoth she, Thinkest thou that these yeomen, so chosen, are the very best archers in all merry England? Yea, true, said the king, smiling, for he was well pleased with the sport that he had seen. And I tell thee that not only are they the best archers in all merry England, but in all the wide world beside. But thou wouldst say, said Queen Eleanor, if I were to find 3 archers to match these 3 yeomen of all thy guard? I would say thou hast done what I could not do, said King, laughing, for I tell thee, there lives not in all these 3 archers to match Tempest and Gilbert and Clifton of Buckinghamshire. Now, said the queen, I know 3 yeomen, and in truth, I've seen them not long since, and I would not fear to match against any 3 that thou canst choose from among all thy 40 archers. And moreover, I will match them here this very day. But I will only match them with thy own archers, providing that thou wilt grant a free pardon to all that may come in my behalf." At this the king laughed loud and long. "Truly," said he, "thou art taking up with strange matters for a queen. If thou wilt bring those 3 fellows which thou speak of, I will promise faithfully to give them free pardon for 40 days, to come or to go wheresoever they please, nor will I harm a hair of their heads in all that time. Moreover, if these that thou bringest shoot better than my yeomen man for man, they shall have the prizes for themselves according to their shooting. But as thou hast so taken up of a sudden with sports of this kind, hast thou a mind for a wager?" "Why, in sooth," said the Queen Eleanor, laughing, "I know aught of such matters, but if thou hast a mind to do somewhat in that way, I will strive to pleasure thee. Wilt thou wager upon thy men?" Then the merry king laughed again, for he dearly loved goodly jest. So he said amidst his laughter, "I will wager 3 tons of Rhenish wine, 10 tons of the stoutest ale, and 10 bows of tempered Spanish yew, with quivers and arrows to match." All that stout around smiled at this, for it seemed a merry wager for a king to give to a queen. But Queen Eleanor bowed her head quietly. "I will take thy wager," said he, "for I know right well where to place those things that thou hast spoken of. Now, who will be on my side in this matter?" And she looked around upon them that stood about, but no one spake or cared to wager upon the queen's side against such archers as Tempest and Gilbert and Clifton. Then the queen spoke again. "Now who will back me in this wager? Wilt thou, my lord bishop of Henneford?" "Nay," quoth the bishop hastily, "it ill befits one of my cloth to deal in such matters. Moreover, there are no such archers as his majesty's in all the world. Therefore I would but lose my money. Methinks that of thy gold weigheth more heavily within thee the wrong to thy cloth," said the queen, smiling. And at this a ripple of laughter went around, for everyone knew how fond the bishop was of his money. Then the queen turned to the knight who stood near, whose name was Sir Robert Lee. "Wilt thou back me in this manner?" said she. "Thou art surely rich enough to risk so much for the sake of a lady." "To pleasure my lady, I would do it," said Sir Robert Lee, "but for the sake of no other in all the world would I wager a groat, for no man can stand against Tempest, Gilbert, and Clifton." Then turning to the king, Queen Eleanor said, "I want no such aid as Sir Robert giveth me, but against thine wine and beer and stout bows, of you I wager this girdle, all set with jewels from around my waist, and surely that is worth more than thine." "Now I take thy wager," quoth the king. "Send for thy archers straightway. But here come forth the others. Let them shoot, and then I will match those that win against all the world." "So be it," said the queen. Thereupon, beckoning to young Richard Partington, she whispered something in his ear, and straightway the page bowed and left the place, crossed the meadows to the other side of the range, where he was presently lost in the crowd. At this, all that stood around whispered to one another, wondering what it all meant, and what 3 men the queen were about to set against those famous archers of the king's guard. And now the 10 archers of the king's guard took their stand again, and all the great crowd were hushed to the silence of death. Slowly and carefully each man shot his shaft, and so deep was the silence that you could hear every arrow rap against the target as it struck it. Then when the last shaft had sped, a great roar went up, and the shooting, I wot, was well worthy of the sound. Once again Gilbert had lodged 3 arrows in the white. Tempest came second with 2 in the white and 1 black ring next to it. But stout Clifford had gone down, and Herbert of Suffolk had taken the 3rd place, for, while both these good yeomen had lodged 2 in the white, Clifton had lost 1 shot upon the 4th ring, and Herbert came in with 1 in the 3rd. All the archers around Gilbert's booth shouted for joy till their throats were hoarse, tossing their caps aloft and shaking their hands with one another. In the midst of all the noise and hubbub, 5 men came walking across the lawn toward the king's pavilion. The first was Richard Partington, and was known to most folk there, but the others were strange to everyone. Besides young Partington walked a yeoman clad in blue, and behind came 3 others, 2 in Lincoln green and 1 in scarlet. This last yeoman carried 3 stout bows of yew tree, 2 fanciful inlaid with silver and 1 with gold. While these 5 men came walking across the meadow, a messenger came running from the king's booth and summoned Gilbert and Tempest and Herbert to go with him. And now the shouting quickly ceased, for all saw that something unwonted was towards. So the folk stood up in their places and leaned forward to see what was the do. When Partington and the others came before the spot where the queen and king sat, the 4 yeomen bent their knees and doffed their caps unto her. King Henry leaned forward, far forward, and stared at them closely. But the Bishop of Hereford, when he saw their faces, started as though stung by a wasp. He opened his mouth as though to speak, but looking up, he saw the queen gazing at him with a smile upon her lips. So he said nothing, but bit his nether lip, while his face was red as a cherry. Then the queen leaned forward and spake in a clear voice. Locksley, said she, I have made a wager with the king that thou and 2 of thy men can outshoot any 3 that he can send against you. Wilt thou do thy best for my sake? Yea, quoth Robin Hood, to whom she spake. I will do my best for thy sake, and if I fail, I make my vow never to finger bowstring more. Now, although Little John had been somewhat abashed in the queen's bower, he felt himself the sturdy fellow he was when the soles of his feet pressed against green grass again. So he said boldly, Now blessings on thy sweet face, say I, and there lived a man that never not do his best for thee. I will say not, only I would like to have the cracking of this knave's plate. Peace, Little John, said Robin Hood hastily in a low voice. But good Queen Eleanor laughed aloud, and a ripple of merriment sounded all over the booth. The Bishop of Hereford did not laugh, neither did the king, but he turned to the queen and quoth, Who are these men that thou hast brought before us? Then up spoke the bishop hastily, for he could hold his peace no longer. Your Majesty, quoth he, yon fellow in blue is a stern outlawed thief of the mid-country named Robin Hood. Yon tall strapping villain goeth by the name of Little John, and the other fellow in green is a certain black-sliding gentleman known as Will Scarlet. The man in red is a rogue of northern minstrel named Alan a Dale. At the speech the queen brows drew together blackly, and he turned to his queen. Is this true? Said he sternly. Yea, said the queen, smiling. The bishop hath told the truth, and truly he should know them well, for he and 2 of his friars spent 3 days in the merry sport with Robin Hood in Sherwood Forest. I did little think that the good bishop would so betray his friends, but bear in mind that thou hast pledged thy promise for the safety of these good yeomen for 40 days. I will keep my promise to the king in a deep voice that showed the anger in his heart. But when these 40 days are gone, let this outlaw look to himself, for mayhaps things will not go so smoothly with him as he would like. Then he turned to his archers, who stood near the Sherwood yeomen, listening and wondering at all that passed. Quoth he, Gilbert, and thou Tempus, and thou Herbert, I pledge myself that ye shall shoot against these 3 fellows. If ye outshoot the knaves, I will fill your caps with silver pennies. If ye fail, ye shall lose your prizes that ye have won so fairly, and they go to them that shooteth against you, man to man. Do your best, lads, and if ye win, this bout shall be glad of it to the last days of your life. Go now, and get yon gone to the butts. Then the 3 archers of the king turned and went back to their booths, and Robin and his men went to their places at the mark from which they were to shoot. Then they strung their bows and made themselves ready, looking over the quivers of arrows and picking out the roundest and the best feathered. But when the king's archers went to their tents, they told their friends all that had passed, and how that these 4 yeomen were the famous Robin Hood, and 3 of his band, to wit, Little John, Will Scarlet, and Alan a Dale. The news of this buzzed around among the archers in the booths, for there was not a man there that had not heard of these great mid-country yeomen. From the archers the news had taken up by the crowd that looked on at the shooting, so that at last everybody stood up, craning their necks to catch sight of the famous outlaws. 6 fresh targets were now set up, 1 for each man that was to shoot, whereupon Gilbert and Tempest and Herbert came straightway forth from the booths. Then Robin Hood and Gilbert of the White Hand tossed a farthing aloft to see who would lead in the shooting, and the loft fell to Gilbert's side. Thereupon he called upon Herbert of Suffolk to lead. Herbert took his place, planted his foot firmly, and fitted a fair, smooth arrow. Then, breathing upon his fingertips, he drew the string slowly and carefully. The arrow sped true, and lodged in the white against the shot, and again he hit the clout. A 3rd shaft he sped, but this time failed of the center, but struck the black, yet not more than a finger's breadth from the white. At this, a shout went up, for it was the best shooting that Herbert had done all that day. Merry Robin laughed, and quoth he, "Thou wilt have an ill time better that sound, Will, for it is thy turn next. Brace thy thews, lad, and bring not shame upon Sherwood." Then Will Scarlet took his place, but because of overcaution, he spoiled his target with the very first arrow that sped, for he hit the next ring to the black, the second from the center. At this Robin bit his lips. "Lad, lad," quoth he, "hold not the string so long. Have I not often taught thee that Gaffer Swank will say, that overcaution spilleth the milk?" To this Will Scarlet took heed. So the next arrow he shot lodged fairly in the center ring. Again he shot, and again he smote the center. But, for all that, stout Herbert had outshot him, and showed the better target. Then all those that looked on clapped their hands for joy, because Herbert had overcome the stranger. Quoth the king firmly to the queen, "If thy archers shoot no better than that, then thou art to lose thy wager, lady." But Queen Eleanor smiled, for she looked for better things from Robin Hood and Little John. And now Tempest took up his place to shoot. He also took overheed to what he was about, and so he fell in Will Scarlet's air. The first arrow he struck in the center ring, but the second missed its mark and smote the black. The last arrow was tipped with luck, for it smote the very center of the clout upon the black spot that marked it. Quoth little Robin Hood, "That is the sweetest shot that hath been sped this day. But nevertheless, friend Tempest, thy cake is burned, methinks, Little John. It is thy turn next." So Little John took his place as bidden, and shot 3 arrows quickly. He never lowered his bow arm in all the shooting, but fitted each shaft with his long bow raised. Yet all 3 of his arrows smote the center within easy distance of the black. At this, no sound of shouting was heard, for although it was the best shooting that they had done all that day, the folk of London town did not like to see the stout Tempest overcome by a fellow from the countryside, even were he as famous as Little John. And now stout Gilbert of the White Hand took his place and shot the greatest care, and again, for the 3rd time in one day, he struck all 3 shafts in the clout. "Well done, Gilbert," shouted Robin Hood, smiting him upon the shoulder. "I make my vow that thou art one of the best archers that ever mine eyes beheld. Thou shouldst be a free and merry ranger like us, lad, for thou art better fitted for the greenwood than for the cobblestones and grey walls of London town." So saying, he took his place, and drew a fair round arrow from his quiver, which he turned over and over ere he fitted it to his bowstring. Then the king muttered in his beard, "Now, blessed Saint Herbert, if thou wilt but jog that rogue's elbow so as to make him smite even the second ring, I will give thee 80 waxen candles, 3 fingers' breadth and thickness to thy chapel, nigh matching." But it may be said Saint Herbert's ears were stuffed with tow, for he seemed not to hear the king's prayer this day. Having gotten 3 shafts to the liking, merry Robin looked carefully to his bowstring ere he shot. "Yea," quoth he to Gilbert, who stood nigh him to watching his shooting, "thou shouldst pay us a visit at merry Sherwood." There he drew the bowstring to his ear. "In London," here he loosed his shaft, "thou canst find naught to shoot at but rooks and daws. There one can tickle the rubs of the noblest stags in England." So he shot even while he talked, yet the shaft lodged not more than half an inch from the very center. "By my soul," cried Gilbert, "art thou the devil in blue to shoot in that wise?" "Nay," quoth Robin, laughing, "not quite so ill as that, I trust." And he took up another shaft and fitted it to the string. Again he shot, and again he smote his arrow close beside the center. A 3rd time he loosened his bowstring, and dropping his arrow just betwixt the other 2, and into the very center, so that the feathers of all 3 were ruffled together, seeming from a distance to be one thick shaft. And now a low murmur ran along among the great crowd, for never before had London seen such shooting as this, and never again would it see it after Robin Hood's day had gone. All saw that the king's archers were fairly beaten, and stout Gilbert clapped his palm to Robin's own, that he could never hope to draw such a bowstring as Robin Hood or Little John. But the king, full of wrath, would not have it, so, though he knew in his mind that his men could not stand against those fellows, "Nay," cried he, clutching his hands upon the arms of his seat, "Gilbert is not yet beaten. Did he not strike the clout thrice? Although I have lost my wager, he hath not yet lost the first prize. They shall shoot again, and still again, till either he or that knave Robin cometh off the best. So thou, Sir Hugh, bid them shoot another round, and another, until one or the other is overcome. Then Sir Hugh, seeing how wroth the king was, said never a word, but went straight away to do his bidding. So he came to where Robin Hood and the other stood, and told them that the king had said. With all my heart, quoth merry Robin, I will shoot from this time till tomorrow day, if it can pleasure my gracious lord and king. Take thy place, Gilbert lad, and shoot. So Gilbert took his place once more, but this time he failed, for a sudden little wind arising, his shaft missed the very center ring, but by not more than the breadth of a barley straw. The eggs are cracked, Gilbert, quoth Robin, laughing, and straightway he loosed his shaft, and once more smote the white circle of the center. Then the king arose from his place, and not a word said he, but he looked around with a baleful look, and it would have been an ill day for anyone that he saw with a joyous or a merry look upon his face. Then he and his queen and all the court left the palace, but the king's heart was brimming full of wrath. After the king had gone, all the yeomen of the archer guard came crowding around Robin and Little John and Will and Allan and Dale to snatch a look at these famous fellows from the mid-country, and with them many that had been onlookers at the sport for the same purpose. Thus it happened presently that the yeomen to whom Gilbert stood talking were all surrounded by a crowd of people that formed a ring about them. After a while, the 3 judges that had the giving away of the prizes came forward, and the chief of them all spake to Robin and said, According to the agreement, the first prize belongeth rightly to thee. So here I give thee 3 silver bugle, where the quiver of 10 golden arrows, and here a purse of 20 golden pounds. And as he spake, he handed those things to Robin, and then turned to Little John. To thee, he said, belongeth the second prize, to wote 50 of the farthest hearts that run on Dallin Lee. Thou mayst shoot them whensoever thou dost list. Last of all, he turned to stout Herbert. Thou, said he, hast held thine own against the yeoman with whom thou dost shoot, and so thou hast kept the prize duly thine, to wote 2 tuns of good Rhenish wine. These shall be delivered to thee wheneversoever thou dost list. Then he called upon the other 7 of the king's archers who had last shot, and gave in each 80 silver pennies. Then up spake Robin, and quoth he, The silver bugle I keep in honor of the shooting match, but thou, Gilbert, art the best archer of all the king's guard, and to thee I freely give this purse of gold. Take it, man, and were it 10 times as much, for thou art a right yeoman, good and true. Furthermore, to each of the 10 that last shot I give 1 of these golden shafts apiece. Keep them always by you, so that ye may tell your grandchildren, and ye are ever blessed with them, that ye are the very stoutest yeomen in all the wide world. At this all shouted aloud, for it pleased them to hear Robin speak so of them. Then up spake Little John. Good friend Tempest, said he, I want not those hearts of Dallin Lee that yon stout judge spoke of, but now, for in truth, we have a now and more than a now in our own country. 20 I give to thee for thine own shooting, and 5 I give to each band for their pleasure. At this another great shout went up, and many tossed their caps aloft, and swore among themselves that no better fellows were walked the sod than Robin Hood and his stout yeomen. While they so shouted with loud voices, a tall burly yeoman of the king's guard came forward and plucked Robin by the sleeve. Good master, quoth he, I have somewhat to tell thee in thine ear, a silly thing, God wot, for one stout yeoman to tell another. But a young peacock of a page, one Richard Partington, was seeking thee without avail in the crowd, and, not being able to find thee, told me that he bore a message to thee from a certain lady that thou wast knowest of. This message he bade me tell thee privily, word for word, and thus it was. Let me see, I trust I have forgotten it not. Yea, thus it was. The lion growls, beware thy head. Is it so? Quoth Robin, starting, for he knew right well that it was the queen sent the message, and that she spake of the king's wrath. Now I thank thee, good fellow, for thou hast done me greatest service than thou knowest of this day. Then he called his 3 yeomen together, and told them privily that they had best be jogging, as it was like to be ill for them so nigh merry London town. So without tarrying long, they made their way through the crowd until they had come out from the press. Then, without stopping, they left London town, and started away northward. Thus ended the famous shooting match before Queen Eleanor. And now we will hear how ill King Harry kept his promise to his queen, that no harm should befall Robin Hood for 40 days, in which time he might come and go as he wished.